Starving little girl I fed came back days later with her mom. Now they both want to live with me. It was an ordinary afternoon when the protagonist decided to take a short walk in the neighborhood. The sun was shining, and the air was warm, carrying the sounds of children playing, birds singing, and distant traffic. Everything seemed calm and normal, but little did the protagonist know that this walk would change life in ways they could never imagine. As they strolled along the familiar streets, their eyes fell on something unusual near the corner of a quiet lane. A small figure was sitting on the ground, hunched over, looking fragile and lost. At first, it seemed like just another child playing outside, but a closer look revealed a sight that stirred a deep feeling of concern. The little girl was incredibly thin. Her clothes were old and tattered, and her shoes were worn out. Her hair was messy, and her face bore traces of dirt and fatigue. She looked smaller than her age, and there was a quiet, almost invisible sadness in her eyes. She sat with her knees pulled close to her chest, glancing around nervously, as if she was waiting for something or someone. People walked past her, many avoiding eye contact, some shaking their heads and moving on. She seemed invisible to the world overlooked, and yet her presence was impossible to ignore. The protagonist felt an immediate tug at their heart, an instinctive need to reach out. At first, the protagonist hesitated. In the past, they had seen many situations where people in need were ignored, and sometimes offering help could be complicated. But something about this girl felt different. There was a vulnerability in her that made it impossible to turn away. They approached slowly, keeping their voice gentle and calm. "Hello," they said softly, kneeling a little distance away. "Are you okay? Do you need some food?" The little girl looked up, her wide eyes filled with caution. She didn't speak at first, only watched the stranger, unsure if this was another person who would ignore her like everyone else. There was fear in her gaze, but also a glimmer of hope. The protagonist could see the way her stomach seemed to pull in and out slightly, evidence of hunger. They reached into their bag and pulled out a small packet of snacks they had brought along, offering it to her. "Here, you can eat this," they said warmly. "It's okay." The little girl hesitated. She had been so used to being ignored or told to leave that this act of kindness seemed almost unbelievable. Slowly, she reached out with tiny hands, barely able to hold the packet. She opened it carefully, as if afraid it might disappear, and took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly as she tasted the food. Relief and gratitude mingled on her face, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax. The protagonist watched her, feeling a mix of sorrow for her condition and a quiet happiness that they could provide some comfort. After a few minutes, the little girl finished the food, but she didn't run away like many children might. She stayed shyly looking at the protagonist. There was a silent understanding forming, a connection that didn't need words. The protagonist gently asked, "Do you have someone at home? Are you hungry often?" The girl shook her head slightly, too timid to speak at first. Then, in a small, trembling voice, she whispered a few broken words that were hard to understand, but enough to indicate that she often went without food and lived in difficult circumstances. Hearing this, the protagonist felt a deep ache in their heart. It was hard to imagine someone so young experiencing such hardship. They realized that this moment was not just about giving a snack. It was about showing care, offering safety, and letting the girl know she was not invisible. They spoke softly, trying to make her feel comfortable. "You don't have to be afraid. I just want to help you. You're not alone." The little girl's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. Instead, she held the packet close and looked down, overwhelmed by emotions she didn't fully understand. The protagonist decided to sit nearby, keeping a respectful distance but making sure she knew they weren't going anywhere. They started talking about small, comforting things, the weather, birds, and nearby trees, anything to make her smile. Slowly, the little girl began to respond, a faint smile appearing on her face for the first time in a long while. It was a small, fragile smile, but it spoke volumes. As they sat together, the protagonist thought about how many children in the world might be in similar situations, unnoticed and hungry, searching for someone to care. But this little girl was here, in this very moment, and they had the chance to make a difference. They asked gently, "Would you like to come here sometimes if you're hungry or need someone to talk to?" The girl nodded slightly, hesitant but hopeful. She seemed to understand that this was a place where she could find comfort and kindness without fear of judgment. The protagonist didn't want to overwhelm her, so they didn't press for more information about her life. Instead, they made a quiet promise to themselves. They would find a way to help her more to ensure she didn't have to go hungry again. Before leaving, they gave her a small bag of food to take home, along with a bottle of water. "Take this with you," they said kindly. "And remember, it's okay to come back if you need anything." The little girl accepted the bag, her small hands trembling slightly, and nodded, a silent promise in return. As the protagonist walked away, they couldn't stop thinking about the girl. Her courage to survive each day, despite her struggles, left a lasting impression. They reflected on how one small act of kindness, a meal, a gentle word, a moment of attention, could mean the difference between hope and despair for someone in need. It was a reminder that sometimes life presented opportunities to make real, tangible changes, and that ignoring them could mean missing out on the chance to change someone's life forever. The protagonist returned home that evening, but their mind kept drifting back to the little girl. They wondered about her life, her mother, and what circumstances had led her to this point. They realized that helping her might not be a one-time action, but a journey, one that required patience, care, and understanding. They felt a sense of responsibility growing within them, a determination to ensure that this child would not face hunger and loneliness alone again. That night, they made plans quietly in their mind. They would leave food for her regularly, perhaps talk to local neighbors or community members who could help, and gradually learn more about her situation. But most importantly, they wanted her to feel seen, valued, and cared for, a stark contrast to the indifference she had experienced before. The memory of her small, fragile figure, sitting alone on the pavement, stayed with them, a constant reminder that even small acts of compassion could spark change. Days went by, but the image of the little girl remained vivid. The protagonist continued their daily routine, but with a new purpose and awareness. Every corner of their neighborhood seemed to whisper reminders of the child, and every meal they ate carried a thought of sharing it with someone in need. That simple encounter had transformed an ordinary afternoon into a moment of awakening, a realization that life was not only about personal comfort, but also about extending kindness to those who needed it most. Eventually, the protagonist would come to see that this meeting was the beginning of a story much larger than a single act of feeding a hungry child. It was the start of a connection, a bond built on trust and care, which would soon grow stronger as more days passed. They didn't yet know how life would change, but they were ready to embrace it, guided by empathy, compassion, and a commitment to make a difference. And in the quiet moments, when the world felt distant, they would remember the little girl's shy smile, a fragile beacon of hope, reminding them that even the smallest gestures could light up someone's life. A few days after that first encounter, the little girl returned. This time, she didn't come alone. Her small steps were hesitant, as if she were carrying the weight of uncertainty along with her. The protagonist noticed her from a distance and felt a mixture of relief and curiosity. The girl's eyes met theirs, and a tiny smile appeared, shy but unmistakably warm. It was clear that she remembered the kindness shown to her earlier, and perhaps, just perhaps, she had felt safe enough to come back. When she reached the protagonist, she whispered softly, "Thank you for last time." Her voice was barely audible, but it carried a sincerity that touched deeply. The protagonist knelt down to her level, smiling gently. "You're welcome. Did you have enough to eat after you went home?" The girl shook her head slightly. She didn't say much else, but her eyes told a story of hardship, hunger, and resilience. That tiny gesture, the shake of her head, revealed that her struggles were far from over. The protagonist realized that this wasn't just a one-time situation. The girl's need was ongoing, and so was her courage. She was brave to face the world every day despite her circumstances, but she was still a child. No child should have to worry about when their next meal would come, or whether anyone would care. The protagonist decided then that more help was needed, and not just sporadically. They would find a way to understand her life, to learn her story, and to provide support in a way that could make a real difference. Curiosity and concern mixed as they gently asked, "Do you live nearby? Where is your family?" The girl hesitated, fidgeting with her hands, looking down at the ground. She spoke in broken, small words, revealing pieces of her life like fragments of a puzzle. She mentioned a house far from the main streets, a mother who was often tired and sick, and a home where there was rarely enough food. It was difficult to understand every detail, but the sense of struggle was clear. Her words painted a picture of a life filled with quiet suffering, where survival was more about enduring than living. Hearing this, the protagonist felt a strong desire to help, to go beyond just feeding her for a few moments. They offered her another small packet of food and asked gently, "Would you like to come with me and talk for a little while? You don't have to be afraid." The girl's small hand reached tentatively for the packet, her fingers brushing against theirs. There was trust forming in that tiny, delicate gesture. She nodded slightly, a silent acceptance that she could rely on someone, at least for a little while. They sat together on a nearby bench, and the protagonist tried to make her feel comfortable. They talked about simple things first: the weather, the colors of the trees, the birds singing nearby. It was an effort to let her relax, to show that she didn't need to be afraid of this moment. Slowly, the girl began to open up, revealing small bits about her daily life. She mentioned how she walked long distances for water, how she helped her mother with chores, and how she often went without meals so that her mother could eat. It was heart-wrenching to hear, yet inspiring at the same time. The protagonist could see that the girl carried a maturity beyond her years, shaped by circumstances that no child should face. But despite the hardships, there was resilience in her, a quiet strength that refused to let life defeat her completely. The protagonist knew that this strength could grow if given the right support and care. They realized that helping her mother too might be essential, because the girl's struggles were closely tied to her family's situation. Over the next few days, the protagonist continued to leave small meals and essentials near the girl's usual spots. Slowly, a routine began to form. The little girl started showing up more regularly, bringing a sense of hope and familiarity each time. She began to trust that these acts of kindness were real and consistent. She even started to speak more, sharing little stories about her day, her dreams, and her fears. The protagonist listened patiently, never rushing her, understanding that trust could not be forced. One afternoon, as they shared a simple snack together, the girl whispered something that caught the protagonist off guard. She mentioned her mother's illness and how hard it was for her to cook or provide for them both. Her words were hesitant, almost fearful, as if speaking them aloud might bring consequences. The protagonist felt a surge of empathy. It became clear that helping the little girl in isolation would not be enough. Her mother's situation was deeply intertwined with her struggles. The protagonist began to think carefully about how to approach the mother, how to offer support without making them feel judged or embarrassed. They wanted to ensure that any help provided would be respectful, compassionate, and empowering. For the little girl, this was not just about food. It was about safety, care, and stability. For the mother, it was about support, hope, and the possibility of relief from constant worry. As days turned into a week, the bond between the protagonist and the little girl grew stronger. The girl started to speak more openly, sharing details about her favorite games, small joys, and little dreams she had never dared to speak about before. She mentioned wanting to go to school regularly, to have friends, and to simply enjoy being a child without constant fear of hunger. Each revelation made the protagonist's resolve stronger. This child deserved a chance at life, a chance to laugh, learn, and grow without fear. One day, the little girl arrived earlier than usual, holding something tightly in her hand. It was a small note, written in childish handwriting, expressing gratitude and a simple wish for a better life. She handed it to the protagonist shyly, her cheeks turning red. It was a touching moment that underscored how much even small acts of care could mean to someone in need. The protagonist felt both humbled and inspired, realizing that their presence was already making a difference in her world. The little girl also revealed her hope of having someone reliable in her life, someone she could turn to when times were tough. The protagonist listened carefully, understanding that what she needed was more than food. It was trust, guidance, and a sense of security. They began to think about practical ways to support both her and her mother, considering options like helping with groceries, arranging medical care for her mother, or even providing clothing and school supplies. This period of learning about the girl's life was also a period of reflection for the protagonist. They realized that sometimes helping someone meant more than immediate relief. It meant understanding their world, their challenges, and their needs in a way that was compassionate and sustainable. They began to feel a growing responsibility, a quiet determination to do whatever was possible to improve the girl's life. One afternoon, as they were sitting together, the little girl suddenly said something that surprised the protagonist. She asked if her mother could meet them, mentioning that she trusted the protagonist and that her mother might need help too. The protagonist felt a mix of emotions: surprise, concern, and a deep sense of purpose. They understood that meeting the mother would be the next step, a step that could potentially change both their lives. As the sun began to set that day, casting a warm glow over the streets, the protagonist reflected on how much had changed in just a few days. A single act of kindness, a meal given to a starving little girl, had blossomed into a connection built on trust, empathy, and understanding. They realized that life sometimes presented moments where one's actions could ripple outward, touching lives in ways that could not be predicted. The little girl had already begun to feel hope, a hope that had been absent from her life for too long. The protagonist decided to continue their support, to be a constant presence in her life, and to prepare for the day they would meet her mother. They understood that this was not just about feeding a child, but about offering care, stability, and the possibility of a better future. Each day brought small victories: the girl's smiles, her words of gratitude, and the growing trust between them. And with each passing day, the protagonist felt more certain that their life, too, would be touched in ways they could never have imagined. By the end of the week, the little girl had begun to open up fully, talking about her routines, her small pleasures, and even her fears without hesitation. She began to see the protagonist as someone reliable, someone who could be trusted in a world that often seemed harsh and uncaring. For the protagonist, every smile, every word, and every shared moment strengthened the bond and reinforced the belief that true acts of kindness could create lasting change. And so, the stage was set for the next chapter: the introduction of her mother, the unfolding of their story, and the possibility of forming a connection that could transform the lives of both the little girl and her family. What had begun as a simple act of feeding a starving child had grown into a journey of compassion, empathy, and hope, a journey that would soon reveal just how far kindness could reach. As days passed, the bond between the protagonist and the little girl grew stronger. She began visiting more regularly, each time with a sense of familiarity and trust that had not existed before. The girl would arrive shyly at first, clutching her small hands together, but soon she would settle comfortably, sharing her little joys and small stories about her day. The protagonist could see a remarkable change. The little girl's eyes, once dull and tired, now held a spark of life, a quiet curiosity, and even tiny hints of happiness. The protagonist continued to provide meals, snacks, and essentials, but they realized that what the girl needed most was not just food. It was a sense of stability, care, and friendship. Every time she arrived, she brought small gestures of gratitude, a smile, a quiet thank you, or a shy laugh when they talked about simple things. The protagonist responded with warmth and encouragement, understanding that these moments were slowly rebuilding her sense of self-worth. One afternoon, while sitting on a park bench under a large tree, the girl began to speak more openly than before. She told the protagonist about her daily routines, the chores she helped with at home, and the little games she played with imaginary friends when she felt lonely. Her words were hesitant at first, but with gentle encouragement, she grew more confident. The protagonist listened carefully, making sure she felt heard and valued. Every story she shared painted a vivid picture of her resilience and imagination, qualities that had managed to survive despite her challenging circumstances. The protagonist noticed that the little girl often mentioned her mother, sometimes with worry and sometimes with pride. She spoke of her mother's struggles with illness and how she tried to help in small ways, like fetching water or tidying the house. It became clear that the girl carried responsibilities far beyond her age. Yet, there was also love and admiration in her words. She wanted her mother to feel better, to be happy, and to have hope again. The protagonist realized that helping the mother might not only improve the girl's life, but also strengthen their bond as a family. Recognizing this, the protagonist began planning small ways to support the mother indirectly. They thought about leaving supplies near the girl's home, discreetly offering assistance without making the mother feel judged or uncomfortable. They wanted the support to be empowering, not humiliating. Meanwhile, they continued to spend time with the girl, providing a safe space where she could be a child, laugh, and forget, even for a little while, the hardships of her everyday life. The little girl's trust in the protagonist grew steadily. She started to share dreams she had never spoken aloud before. She talked about attending school regularly, learning new things, and even making friends. These were simple dreams, yet they carried immense significance because they represented normalcy, something she had long been denied. The protagonist encouraged her, explaining that these dreams were possible and that they would do their best to help her achieve them. Each conversation was a building block, reinforcing hope in a life that had too often been defined by struggle. One day, the girl brought a small handmade drawing, a picture of her home and a sun shining brightly above it. She handed it to the protagonist shyly, her eyes shining with pride. "For you," she said quietly. The protagonist felt a deep emotion stir within, a mixture of gratitude, tenderness, and responsibility. That drawing symbolized trust, creativity, and a fragile optimism. It reminded them that even in difficult circumstances, children can find ways to express hope and love when someone shows them care. As the weeks passed, the girls' visits became a routine, but each visit was unique in its own way. Sometimes they shared meals, other times they played small games or simply sat and talked. The protagonist noticed small changes in her appearance too. She seemed healthier, her cheeks had a slight glow, and her energy levels were improving. But more importantly, her spirit seemed lighter. She smiled more often, laughed softly, and spoke with a confidence that was slowly emerging from within. During one of these afternoons, the girl hesitated before speaking, her tiny fingers nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. Finally, she whispered, "Will you meet my mother?" The question hung in the air, delicate and cautious. The protagonist felt a mix of emotions, surprise, concern, and a deep sense of purpose. This request was significant. It meant that the little girl trusted them enough to introduce someone very important in her life. It also meant that the next step in helping her was approaching, a step that would involve compassion, understanding, and careful planning. The protagonist agreed gently, reassuring her that they would be happy to meet her mother. "We will take it slow," they said softly. "There's no rush. We just want to help and be kind." The girl's face brightened, a mixture of relief and happiness washing over her. She ran her small hand through her hair and nodded, feeling secure in the knowledge that someone truly cared about both her and her mother. In the following days, the little girl started preparing for the meeting in her own way. She spoke more about her mother, describing her personality, her likes, and her challenges. She mentioned that her mother worried a lot and often seemed tired and discouraged. The protagonist listened carefully, absorbing every detail. This knowledge would help them approach the mother in a way that was respectful and considerate, ensuring that the help offered would be meaningful and welcome. The protagonist also thought carefully about what kind of support could be offered. They wanted it to be sustainable and empowering, not simply a temporary solution. They planned to bring food, clothing, and other essentials, but also emotional support and guidance. They hoped to create an environment where both mother and daughter could feel safe, cared for, and hopeful about the future. Meanwhile, the little girl continued to open up about her feelings, dreams, and fears. She spoke about wanting to go to school regularly, to learn new things, and to have friends her age. She mentioned how much she loved small, simple joys like drawing, reading, and playing games. These conversations reminded the protagonist that beneath the hardships, she was still a child, deserving of every chance to enjoy life, grow, and flourish. The protagonist realized that building trust and connection took time. It wasn't just about offering food or material support. It was about creating a safe space where the girl could be herself, share her thoughts without fear, and feel valued. Each visit reinforced this bond, each small interaction a reminder that patience, empathy, and consistency were the keys to helping someone truly. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the park, the girl confided something deeply personal. She spoke about nights when she worried about her mother's health, about moments of fear and loneliness, and about her hope that someday things would be different. Her voice was quiet, trembling slightly, but it carried immense honesty. The protagonist listened intently, offering words of comfort and reassurance. They promised to help in every way they could, emphasizing that the girl was not alone anymore. Over time, these moments of sharing, trust, and connection strengthened the protagonist's resolve. They realized that this was more than a casual act of kindness. It was a chance to truly change the course of someone's life. They began to imagine a future where the little girl could thrive, where her mother could find relief from constant worry, and where both could experience stability and hope. The girl, in turn, grew more confident in the presence of the protagonist. She laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and even began showing curiosity about the world beyond her immediate struggles. She asked questions about everyday things, shared her thoughts, and slowly began to dream beyond mere survival. The protagonist recognized these small but significant changes as signs of resilience and hope emerging in a life that had long known hardship. Eventually, the day arrived when the little girl felt ready to introduce her mother. She held the protagonist's hand tightly as they walked together, her steps tentative but filled with anticipation. The protagonist's heart was full of compassion and care, knowing that this meeting could mark the beginning of a new chapter for both mother and daughter. They approached it with patience, respect, and the intention to offer meaningful, lasting support. By this time, the bond between the protagonist and the little girl had grown so strong that it was clear this relationship was not just temporary. It was rooted in trust, empathy, and genuine concern for each other's well-being. This connection had created a foundation of hope, and the protagonist felt a quiet determination to extend that hope to her mother as well. And so the stage was set for the next chapter, a meeting that would bring a mother into their lives, open new possibilities, and reveal just how far kindness, trust, and empathy could reach. The journey that had begun with a simple act of feeding a starving little girl was evolving into a story of connection, compassion, and the potential for transformation that would touch the lives of everyone involved. The day finally arrived when the little girl brought her mother along. The protagonist had been both nervous and excited for this meeting. They knew this was an important step, not just for the little girl, but for her mother as well. It was clear that the mother carried heavy burdens, and the protagonist wanted to approach her with care, kindness, and respect. They wanted her to feel safe and not judged, understanding that every family has its struggles, and offering help required sensitivity. When the mother arrived, she looked weary but alert. Her clothes were simple, showing signs of wear, and her face carried the marks of long nights and hard work. Her eyes, however, held warmth and cautious hope as they met the protagonists. The little girl squeezed her mother's hand tightly, as if assuring her that this was someone they could trust. The mother seemed hesitant at first, unsure about the intentions of the protagonist, but the genuine kindness in their demeanor slowly began to ease her doubts. The protagonist greeted her warmly, introducing themselves and speaking softly. "It's so nice to finally meet you. Your daughter has told me so much about you. I just want to offer some help and support, nothing more." The mother's lips curved into a small, tentative smile. She appreciated the calm, non-judgmental tone. For a moment, the tension in her shoulders relaxed, and she felt that perhaps this stranger could be someone who genuinely cared for both her and her child. They all sat together on a nearby bench, and the protagonist began by offering a small meal and some essentials. The mother's eyes widened slightly in surprise, realizing that someone outside their family cared enough to provide support. She hesitated before accepting, perhaps out of pride, but eventually nodded and took the food. The little girl watched, her face lighting up with relief and gratitude. The protagonist noticed the small gestures of affection between mother and daughter, the way they looked at each other with unspoken love and concern. As they ate, the mother began to open up. She explained how life had been difficult for them, detailing her struggles with illness, unemployment, and lack of support from relatives. Her words were measured, careful, as if she didn't want to seem like a burden. She spoke about the nights when she worried about food, about paying bills, and about ensuring her daughter had at least some comfort and care. Listening to her, the protagonist felt a deep sense of empathy. They realized that this woman had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders, yet she had done her best to protect and nurture her child. The protagonist offered reassurance, speaking gently about ways they could help. They suggested providing meals regularly, some clothing and supplies, and emotional support. But they made it clear that they weren't there to take control or replace the mother. Instead, they wanted to work together to ease some of the burdens and offer a sense of stability. The mother listened carefully, her eyes glistening as she felt a genuine sense of hope for the first time in a long while. Over the next few days, the protagonist continued their support in small, practical ways. They delivered food, helped organize some basic necessities, and spent time with both the mother and the little girl. Slowly, trust grew deeper. The mother began to speak more freely about her worries, her hopes, and her dreams. She talked about wanting her daughter to attend school regularly, to have a safe environment, and to enjoy her childhood without constant fear or hunger. The protagonist listened and encouraged her, offering practical suggestions while always respecting her dignity. The little girl thrived in this environment of support. She laughed more often, played games, and even helped her mother with small chores around the house. The protagonist noticed the small but significant changes in both of them. The mother's face began to show signs of relief, a softening of worry lines that had been etched over years of struggle. The little girl's energy returned, her curiosity sparked again, and her once timid voice became more confident and expressive. The protagonist realized that the bond they were forming was more than just charity. It was becoming a connection built on empathy, understanding, and genuine care. They began to see the potential for something deeper, a chance to create a supportive environment where both mother and daughter could flourish. They spent time talking about dreams, possibilities, and ways to make life easier for both of them. Simple things like preparing meals together, sharing stories, and playing small games became opportunities to strengthen their bond and build trust. One afternoon, while helping the mother organize some household items, she spoke quietly, almost hesitantly. "I don't know how to thank you enough," she said, her voice trembling. "You've already done so much for us." The protagonist smiled gently and shook their head. "You don't need to thank me. I care about you and your daughter. I just want to help make things better." Her eyes filled with tears and she nodded, feeling an unfamiliar warmth and hope. The little girl, sensing the growing trust between the adults, became more animated. She shared stories about her school dreams, the friends she hoped to make, and the activities she wished she could try. The protagonist encouraged her imagination and reassured her that many of her dreams could come true. They emphasized the importance of education, creativity, and emotional support, showing both mother and daughter that life could be different with patience, care, and consistent support. As days turned into weeks, a routine of connection and support formed. The protagonist continued to visit, bringing food, necessities, and companionship. The mother gradually became more comfortable with their presence, viewing them not as an outsider, but as someone who genuinely cared and could be trusted. She began to open up about her own past struggles, her hopes for her daughter, and even the small joys she had once forgotten. During this period, the protagonist observed how the little girl began to blossom. She laughed freely, played without fear, and expressed herself in ways that had been hidden before. Her confidence grew, and she started sharing her thoughts, fears, and dreams openly. The mother, too, began to feel a sense of relief, knowing that her daughter was not facing the world alone and that there was someone who genuinely cared for both of them. One day, the mother spoke with quiet determination. "I don't know what the future holds, but I want my daughter to have a safe place to grow, someone she can rely on. I want stability for both of us." Her words were heartfelt, honest, and filled with hope. The protagonist listened carefully, understanding that this was more than a simple request. It was an expression of trust, a desire for a chance at a better life. The protagonist reassured her, saying, "We will work together. I will help both of you in every way I can. You don't have to do this alone anymore." The mother's eyes filled with tears again, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and hope. The little girl hugged her mother tightly, feeling the safety and warmth that had been missing from their lives for so long. As the bond deepened, the protagonist began to see how much small gestures of care and understanding could transform lives. They realized that kindness, patience, and empathy were not just temporary solutions. They could create lasting change. Each shared meal, each conversation, each moment of trust was building a foundation for a brighter future. The mother and daughter slowly began to integrate into the protagonist's life more comfortably. They shared stories, meals, and laughter. The protagonist ensured that every action was supportive and empowering, never overstepping boundaries, but offering consistent care. This balance helped the mother regain confidence and the little girl regain her childhood, allowing both of them to envision a life that was more hopeful and secure. Through this growing connection, the protagonist understood that helping someone truly involved more than material support. It required understanding, patience, empathy, and the willingness to invest time and emotional energy. They realized that the little girl's transformation was deeply tied to her mother's well-being, and that nurturing both of them would create a ripple effect of hope, resilience, and trust. As weeks passed, the mother became more open about her past, her dreams, and even her fears. She shared the challenges she had faced alone and the worries she carried for her daughter. The protagonist listened without judgment, offering reassurance, support, and practical solutions whenever possible. Their presence became a source of comfort, creating an environment where both mother and daughter could feel safe, cared for, and valued. Through these moments of connection, the protagonist saw the true impact of compassion. A single act of kindness, a meal offered to a hungry little girl, had blossomed into a relationship that was changing lives. The mother began to feel hope, the little girl began to experience joy and security, and the protagonist felt the profound satisfaction of making a real difference. And so, the foundation for the next chapter of their lives was firmly laid. Trust had been established, bonds had been strengthened, and the mother and daughter were beginning to see a future filled with possibilities. The protagonist's initial act of kindness had grown into something far greater, a transformative relationship that promised care, support, and a chance at a brighter, more stable life for both the little girl and her mother. Over time, the connection between the protagonist, the little girl, and her mother grew stronger. What had started as a single act of kindness, offering food to a starving child, had evolved into a bond built on trust, care, and compassion. The mother and daughter began visiting more frequently, and each encounter strengthened their sense of security and hope. The protagonist observed remarkable changes in both of them. The little girl, once timid and withdrawn, now laughed freely, played games, and expressed herself confidently. Her mother, who had carried the weight of worry and exhaustion for years, began to show signs of relief, warmth, and optimism. One afternoon, as they all sat together sharing a simple meal, the mother spoke softly. "I don't know how to thank you enough," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You have given us hope and comfort when we had none. You've shown us kindness we never expected." The protagonist shook their head gently, smiling warmly. "You don't need to thank me. I care about both of you and I want to help in every way I can. You're not alone anymore." The mother's eyes glistened with tears, and the little girl hugged her mother tightly, her small arms wrapped around her. As days turned into weeks, the mother and daughter began to express a desire for something more permanent. They wanted stability, a safe place where they could truly feel at home. They didn't want to worry about food, shelter, or safety anymore. The little girl would often whisper shyly to the protagonist, "Can we stay with you?" And her mother, seeing the positive changes in her daughter and feeling the genuine care from the protagonist, asked the same question more openly. "Would it be possible for us to live with you? It would give us a chance to rebuild our lives." The protagonist felt a mixture of emotions, surprise, concern, and responsibility, but above all, a deep sense of purpose. They understood that accepting them into their home would be a big step, but it was also an opportunity to make a life-changing difference for two people who had endured so much. They spoke calmly and reassuringly to both mother and daughter, explaining that they would do everything possible to provide a safe, loving, and supportive environment. The mother nodded, a hopeful smile spreading across her face, and the little girl's eyes sparkled with excitement and relief. The process of integrating them into the protagonist's home required careful planning. They wanted to ensure that the transition was smooth, comfortable, and respectful. The protagonist prepared the living space, arranging a small room for the mother and daughter, complete with clean bedding, basic necessities, and a few small touches to make them feel welcome. They also discussed practical routines, meal times, chores, school arrangements for the little girl, and daily support for the mother. Every detail was approached thoughtfully, ensuring that the environment was nurturing, safe, and encouraging. When the mother and daughter finally moved in, there was a mixture of joy, nervousness, and anticipation. The little girl ran through the new space, exploring her room and giggling with excitement. Her mother followed closely, taking in the changes with gratitude and cautious optimism. The protagonist welcomed them warmly, emphasizing that this was now a shared home built on care, respect, and support. They all spent the first evening together, sharing stories, laughter, and dreams. It was a simple evening, but it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, stability, and the promise of a better future. As the days passed, routines began to form. The little girl started attending school regularly, something she had dreamed of but never had the opportunity to do consistently before. The protagonist helped her with homework, encouraged her learning, and celebrated every small achievement. The mother also began to regain confidence, contributing in her own ways to the household, managing tasks, and even starting to explore small opportunities for personal growth. Together, they were building a life that felt stable, secure, and filled with love. The protagonist continued to offer guidance and support, but always with respect for their independence. They encouraged the mother to make her own decisions, to find her strengths, and to nurture her daughter without feeling overwhelmed. The little girl, in turn, thrived in an environment where she felt safe, valued, and heard. She laughed freely, shared her thoughts openly, and began to dream bigger than she ever had before. Every small step of progress reinforced the power of empathy, patience, and consistent care. The bond between the three deepened in countless small ways. They cooked meals together, played simple games, and shared quiet moments of conversation. The protagonist noticed how much joy could come from these small, everyday interactions, the mother smiling as her daughter told a story, the little girl giggling as they played a simple game, the warmth of a shared meal that brought a sense of belonging. These moments were not grand or extraordinary, but they were transformative. They reminded everyone that kindness, consistency, and love could create lasting change in people's lives. As weeks turned into months, the little girl's confidence and happiness blossomed. She made friends at school, learned new skills, and embraced activities she had never tried before. Her mother, seeing her daughter thrive, felt a renewed sense of purpose and pride. She began to believe in the possibility of a brighter future, and the weight of constant worry and fear gradually lifted. The protagonist watched these changes with quiet satisfaction, understanding that the simple act of offering help had evolved into a life-altering journey for all of them. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, the mother expressed something heartfelt. "I never imagined that someone could care so much about us," she said softly. "You've given us a chance to rebuild our lives, to feel hope again. We will always be grateful." The protagonist smiled and replied, "You don't need to thank me. We are building this together. You and your daughter deserve happiness, safety, and love. That's what matters most." Her eyes filled with tears of relief and joy, and the little girl hugged both the mother and the protagonist tightly, as if sealing the bond that had formed between them. Life continued to settle into this new rhythm. The little girl's laughter became a daily sound in the home, her curiosity and creativity a constant delight. The mother's confidence and energy returned gradually, allowing her to engage more fully in her daughter's life and in the shared household. The protagonist observed that every small act of care, patience, and empathy had compounded over time, creating an environment where healing, growth, and joy were possible. The story of their journey became one of hope and transformation. A single act of kindness, feeding a starving child, had grown into a life-changing relationship. It was a reminder that even small gestures could ripple outward, affecting lives in ways that were impossible to predict. The mother and daughter had found stability, love, and care, and the protagonist had gained a deep sense of fulfillment and purpose. Together, They were creating a family not bound by blood, but by compassion, trust, and shared experiences. The little girl often expressed her gratitude in her own way, bringing small drawings, sharing stories, or simply hugging the protagonist and saying, "Thank you for helping us." Each gesture was a reminder that the kindness extended to them had not only met their immediate needs, but had also given them hope for a better future. The mother, too, shared her appreciation quietly and sincerely, acknowledging that their lives had changed for the better in ways she had never imagined possible. Through this journey, the protagonist realized the true power of empathy and care. It wasn't just about providing food, shelter, or material support. It was about offering emotional security, trust, and a sense of belonging. These elements were what truly transformed the lives of the mother and daughter. The protagonist's patience, understanding, and consistent support had created a foundation upon which they could rebuild their lives. As time went on, the home became a place of warmth, laughter, and safety. The little girl's education progressed, her confidence grew, and she began to envision a future full of possibilities. The mother regained a sense of hope and independence, contributing to the household and supporting her daughter in every way she could. And the protagonist, who had simply responded to a child's need with compassion, had found a deep, lasting connection that enriched everyone's life. Looking back, it was clear that the journey had started with a small act of kindness, but it had grown into something much greater, a story of resilience, trust, and love. The little girl who had once been hungry and alone now had a home, an education, and a future filled with hope. Her mother, who had carried the burdens of hardship for years, now had support, comfort, and the reassurance that she was not alone. And the protagonist had witnessed firsthand how empathy and compassion could change lives in profound and lasting ways. In the end, the story became a testament to the power of human kindness. It showed that even a single act of generosity, when combined with patience, understanding, and consistent care, could transform lives. The little girl and her mother had found stability, hope, and happiness, and the protagonist had discovered the profound fulfillment that comes from helping others. Together, they created a new chapter of life, one filled with love, laughter, and the unshakable belief that even in the hardest times, kindness could light the way.